what Radiant's job is to do is to deliver the future and to make commitments on what we can deliver. So we have committed ourselves to being ready to do a fuel test in 2026. So just a year and a half away to solve this 50 years of no reactor. We are smaller than any of those. We are down at 1 megawatt, so enough power for 1,000 homes. And we can mass produce these in a factory, deliver them to a site, and with no infrastructure, just outside of a 35-foot fence line, you can operate them and be at the NRC public dose limit for a reactor. So what we're working on is this completely different technology, right? It's a small unit, and when a customer operates it, they can tell it to be on and tell it to be off. All right, you have control over your system because you're the end user. And if you want to, you can turn it off and you can tell us to come pick it up, which is kind of the coolest thing ever about this 1 megawatt portable scale, is that you are not making a commitment to putting a bunch of heavy infrastructure. You are not making a commitment to having nuclear waste stored on your site that gets sent away with the unit. And I think this is the nuclear power that people want, that we haven't really seen before, that is mass producible, right? That can achieve these great economies of scale and be deployed out to anywhere in the world.
Welcome to Sourcery. I'm Molly O'Shea, founder of Sourcery, a weekly top VC deals newsletter highlighting the top GPs, founders, and deal announcements leading the next innovation cycle. Today, we have Doug Bernauer, founder and CEO of Radiant. Radiant is a nuclear company developing portable nuclear reactors to replace traditional diesel generators. They've raised over $50 million to date, including a $40 million Series B in April 2023, led by A16Z, with other notable funds like Founders Fund and Decisive Point. This is an inspiring conversation on the future of clean energy. I hope you enjoy. Yeah. Hi, Doug. Nice to have you on. How's it going? I know you've been traveling a bit and you're pretty busy right now in the phase of Radiant.
Yeah, pretty busy, but I have to have infinite energy.
That's true. Okay, so to start the conversation, I just want to set the stage. You have a remarkably accomplished background and career. You've pretty much touched every project with Elon at SpaceX. And I just think it would be great to go there, and please don't hold back. Would love to know everything and what you've kind of learned along the way.
Yeah, well, that's very flattering, but a lot of the projects I touched were the ones that nobody else wanted to touch, at least early on. That was definitely the case. Yeah, I spent 12 years at SpaceX, had joined when they had failed 2 rockets in a row, but I thought it was just a big and beautiful mission, to lower the cost of launch, to make life multiplanetary. And that's why I did that for 12 years, but I worked on all sorts of crazy projects. So, I started off working on Falcon 1 integration, which is the only rocket we had, and everyone was working on it in some regard. And then later I worked on Falcon 9, the first ground system for that, the hardware in the loop system for Falcon 9. And then I moved on to Grasshopper, which is a flying test stand, which was like a barely funded project, and it seemed like a pie in the sky. But it turned into all rockets with legs and all being recoverable, and a pretty important step in the revenue and success story of SpaceX and just American launch as well. But I also worked on Hyperloop and on the Boring Company kind of ideas that came from that while I was there, and on Mars systems, which is how I started to look at nuclear.
Fantastic. And what exactly did you do with each of these projects? What was your main role?
Oh, geez. Sort of, well, I'm an electrical engineer, but mainly it was kind of systems engineering work. It was trying to really figure out what's really the mission, and how do we get there the fastest we possibly can, and how do we get more resources than we've actually been given, right? And we can do that by convincing people, or by adopting things from other programs, or finding the right partners, or location to test, or excess hardware that was being used for something else. So trying to basically creatively make the future happen sooner.
And I know that you are now working with a couple of your previous colleagues from SpaceX at Radiant. I was fortunate enough to come by the new facilities in El Segundo. I met Bob, I met some of your team members. I would love to learn and share more about your team to the audience. What are their backgrounds? Let's talk about Bob. Who is Bob? What's his background?
Yeah.
As well as others on your team.
Yeah, so Bob helped found Radiant. He's a co-founder with me of Radiant, and Bob and I worked together actually on Hyperloop at SpaceX, which was one of these wild projects where basically the only answer was to go to like 2 a.m. every day for like 3 months straight. Near the end there, where we were, going to be late and not delivering on time. This big event, which was like Hyperloop, was like a 4,200 foot long tube that was 6 feet in diameter. We had to vacuum down and had to run a remotely controlled vehicle in there. So Bob did literally all of the software and comms work related to that thing, and basically in the extra hours beyond his day job, which is sort of what I was doing as well at that point. So I think that there are others aside from Bob here as well, but Bob really does a bunch of software and cybersecurity things way better than I ever could. It's awesome, and we just get along really well. Find interesting details and things, and make each other laugh a lot, which is important because we got to be having fun. Uh, Work is hard, life is hard. We can have a really great, beautiful mission that if we achieve it, it's going to be spectacular for the world. But if it was a miserable grind 100% of the time, that would be pretty awful also. I don't know, there's some kind of fun in suffering together in projects, and we do that well.
Building hard things can really bring people together.
Yeah, and then there's a bunch of others here. So there's some varied backgrounds. We have some executive folks, especially on the operations team from MasterCar, which is a very, very cool company that all engineers will know well. Um, we have some folks from Naval Reactors from that program, some folks from National Labs from both Idaho National Lab and Oak Ridge National Lab, primarily on the nuclear team. But a whole bunch of people who also have come out of aerospace who recognize the capability of nuclear technology and see as this underutilized benefit for society and for technology. A lot of just generally aerospace engineers who want to come work on climate essentially, and get our heads out of the clouds maybe and get back down to earth and solve some challenges we've got here. And in doing so, I think we'll actually evolve space later on.
Yeah, I believe so. I think this will all help. Before we get too deep, I'm sure I could ask you a ton more questions about the team. Let's go to the founding of Radiant and what Radiant is. Could you explain more on Radiant Nuclear, how you founded the company, what your main product is, and where you are in the stage of the business?
Yeah, that's a whole lot to remember. So founding the company, way back in 2019, I was at SpaceX and looking at what was happening in the U.S. The U.S. military created a thing called the Pele program, where they said we want a 1 megawatt air transportable reactor, so something you can fly around in a C-17. And I was just overjoyed because I recognized that if you could do that, you could put that on a Starship, which can take 100 tons to space. And so this could be the way we actually get nuclear tech in space. And I had worked on these Mars system design. I knew that that would be massive. Basically, could really make making life multiplanetary way less challenging and remove all the miracles in the way. Um, so that's really one of the founding moments was this like early 2019 where I saw the market was changing. And this was even ahead of, I think, the newfound public support for nuclear, which has really started to blossom in the last 2 years, I would say.
Hmm.
Um, but I realized the potential there. I had looked at these Mars studies. I had done a lot of work at SpaceX. I believe that the mission of making life multiplanetary is actually still what I'm doing now. And I realized that it would be a lot easier to leave SpaceX to go and do that than to try to convince the leadership there and turn it into a real program that could exist on its own. And it's kind of because nuclear is a very risky technology, right? It doesn't make sense to do that within a space company, but to do it from the outside. But I do feel like the mission of making life multiplanetary, um, it needs to have nuclear technology for that to really blossom and to succeed. And I think if we can develop a product for Earth that we can mass produce, that we completely change the game in nuclear technology. So this is what Radiant is working on. Nothing related to space. I just had spent 12 years there. So that's the part of the founding story. But you can make a 1 megawatt reactor that is factory constructed, 50 units a year, so a reactor every week coming off the line, and then you can transport that by land, sea, or air to any place in the world. So you can put it in a location where people only have access to extremely expensive diesel power. for a variety of reasons. But you can give them an option to have a completely clean nuclear technology. It's 5 years of energy in a box. And so it is way less expensive because of that. Because if you've got to take diesel and move it really far, it becomes expensive, and it pollutes the environment. Nobody likes smelling of diesel exhaust fumes if that's your only source of power. It's not great living conditions. So we can improve people's lives all over the world in these like really hard to reach areas. And mass producing a product, it's how literally everything was made. This headset, the screens we're seeing each other through, literally everything in our world. It's the right way to do economic production of something really reliable. And that's what I'm excited about doing in nuclear.
Forgive me if I botch this term, but you're using triso fuel.
Yeah, instead of
Okay.
the typical nuclear fuel, which is a uranium dioxide pellet.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so the fuel form is not really new. It is less often used, but everything in nuclear has been done. In usually the 1950s or 60s is the answer as to when. And so people have actually put together reactors with thorium fuel, with high enriched uranium, with ceramic coated particles. We're focused on those because I want to put the reactors anywhere in the world, and so I want them to be built with a really, really high degree of safety against any sort of environmental damage or release of something radioactive. So if you use a ceramic coated fuel, what we're doing is these tiny poppy seed sized kernels of fuel. There are about 120 million of them for 100 kilograms of uranium. And this is all in a core that's only 4 feet in diameter. I could give it a hug. It's a little core. But the reason you do that is so that the temperature limit of the fuel becomes this extremely high value, and you can go to about 1600 Celsius before there's an appreciable failure rate of the ceramic coated fuel. So what it means is you can't melt down the fuel, right? So you remove one of these big risks that is common amongst the reactors that use the uranium dioxide pellets and zirconium tubes. That's the standard for light water reactor technology. Uh, but not only that, so we have a helium in the system. We have a helium pump that we actually have behind me, and we've been doing a bunch of testing with it. But it was 2 years in the making, so it's very exciting now to be testing it. We released a video recently on that. But anyway, get to the point. We use helium gas because it can't become radioactive either, and it's a gas. It can't actually absorb a neutron, which is what makes something radioactive when it starts out not being radioactive, right? And so if the unit ever leaks, which it could, it could get knocked over, by some environmental disaster or people, or by whatever means. If the gas comes out, the reactor can't operate anymore, which is bad. In a remote area, you might really want your reactors function. But you could have more than one of them. But the goal is to put so much safety in the design by having this more expensive form of fuel, this more expensive form of coolant. Helium is not as cheap to do as water, obviously, um, but those two things allow you to have no leak of a radioactive liquid ever to the environment.
Right. So it's far more safer, and uh, just a completely different concept to what most people would assume with nuclear energy.
Yeah, although it is a standard, it's called a high temperature gas reactor.
Mhm.
And so it's a type that's been around for a long time, and the fuel form actually goes all the way back to the 60s also.
Let's draw this out more in terms of the history of nuclear energy. There are a lot of misconceptions around it, and it's kind of just dropped off and plateaued. There's been like zero progress in the US. And so could you just walk us through the history of nuclear energy, and why you kind of want to emphasize it now and what the process is like?
Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert, but I'll summarize the nuclear history. So basically, in the late 1930s, the neutron is discovered and measured. In the 1940s, the Chicago pile reactor is put together outside of Chicago by Enrico Fermi in the U.S., and they get the pile to go critical. And then from there, a weapons program is developed, and I think a lot of people know that piece of the story, but we develop a weapon in the 40s. In the early 1950s, the U.S. Eisenhower is president at the time, and he wants to make use of nuclear technology to make power, to make clean power, to put that all over the world. And that's the Atoms for Peace program that he sets into motion. And the way we develop that is that the U.S. developed submarine propulsion power reactors. a guy named Hyman Rickover does that work, and he's amazing. There's one decent documentary on it. I wish there were more, but it's a fun one to dig into. But basically, the Navy commits to taking a reactor, making a reactor for the first time ever, which means you've got to develop shielding so that people can be close by. None of that had been done before, and they set up a bunch of materials and tested them. Took gamma or neutron sources and put them through the materials and found out how much they would need to attenuate it. And it was a lot of just brute force, empirical, build big data sets quickly. But they built the Nautilus, this submarine that then went underneath the North Pole. And the polar ice gets larger and larger, so it's like an undersea mountain. And they had to develop actually a sonar piece of equipment to act as an altimeter, so they knew how deep they would have to actually go. They set out to go do that mission, and they did it almost immediately. And then right after that program, a 5-year plan was announced. I'm going like too into detail now, sorry, but this is the
No,
exciting
you're
part.
not.
The
Keep
50s,
going.
the 50s is the most exciting. So they put together a 5-year plan under Strauss, the Atomic Energy Commissioner at the time, and he said, the submarines work, obviously. This is this beautiful technology. We can take these atoms that were for war and they're now for peace, right? And yeah, we've seen it now. Everyone knows that you can do it with a submarine. This amazing voyage under the North Pole. And I want everybody to know that, so I'm glad we're spending the time on it. But we basically went, well, why don't we use this to make electric power and make huge amounts of clean power on our grids? But the thing they didn't know was like exactly what that would look like, because it's not the same thing as having a submarine, right? And having yourself surrounded by water and all that excess shielding makes it really, really easy to do safely. So the 5-year plan were 5 different reactor types. There was a sodium graphite reactor experiment, an experimental breeder reactor, a light water reactor, and all of these 5 reactors needed to be built within 5 years. And they said, whichever type gets built the quickest and looks the most scalable, we're just going to take that one and we're just going to scale it and put it all over the US and make as many of them as we can. And all 5 of them were done within 5 years. The fastest was 2.5 years. Shippingport reactor was the quickest one done, and it was a light water reactor, and it ended up being the way that we wanted to scale. And that's why today we have, I think the number is about 93 operating gigawatt scale light water reactors. They're all based on that one design from that moment in time, way back when. So anyway, in the 60s, the 50s, we build these few early reactors, and they actually last a couple of decades too. They're not like little experiments. They're big successes built very, very quickly. I want to get back to that again. In the 60s, though, we go and then deploy a whole bunch of reactors. And there's continuing development. HTGRs, the high temperature gas reactor category, is developed in the 60s a little bit. It's kind of the last type of reactor developed. That's where the ceramic coated fuel, TRISO, comes from. And then in the 70s, we continue to scale more and more reactors. And throughout the 80s, we're building them still. But there's a sort of an anti-nuclear sentiment that's building in the U.S., especially throughout the 60s and the 70s. And eventually, there's an energy crisis in the 70s, and it leads to creation of the Department of Energy, the ending of the Atomic Energy Commission, which there's a bunch of contributing factors to, but it becomes the NRC in the mid-1970s. And then from that point forward, there are only the designs we had from before that point in the mid-70s getting built, and then the rate drops dramatically, and there's almost nothing built after the 90s in the U.S. That's a pretty. I said it was going to be short and it was long, but hopefully there's some useful details there.
No, it
But I
was
think things have
fascinating.
now turned around completely as far as public sentiment goes, which actually is a huge factor in what's happened with the nuclear industry.
Can you share more about that?
Um, Absolutely. So I think in the 80s we were just discovering that climate change was a thing, that humans could impact the environment. By the time we got into the 90s, and Al Gore took up that cause, amongst others, it became center stage for the public in the U.S. And most of my history is very U.S. centric, which apologies, I just don't know the rest too well. And then by the 2000s, it became a policy point, and people were starting to think about what the future would look like if we priced things to try to make incentives for it to be a clean world. And I think now, like after the 2010s, we got to a position where the public were so in favor of nuclear technology again that I want to get this right. I think it is I want to say in 2016, finally, advanced nuclear became a bipartisan supported issue. in Congress, which is they're the representatives, right? And so it's a really good sign and signal that, hey, everyone is actually getting behind nuclear. And now we've recently had things like the movie Oppenheimer, right, and other things start to happen in our world that make us recognize the importance of energy independence and resilience. And I think people are really excited about nuclear technology again, which is critically important. The only bad part about this is people who are excited about nuclear, who want to go and use it, the entrepreneurs and the technology development are way behind, right? We can't move as quickly as the public support for nuclear has.
Is that what is the process like? Why are you behind?
So many reasons. So there's no. I like to say this line a lot. There's no new nuclear design that has been fueled in the U.S. in the last 50 years, and that's true. There's a lot of qualifiers there. Things have happened outside the U.S. Some new reactors have been built in the U.S., but they're not a new design. They're a new build of an old design. So to a large degree, because we haven't done it, we've sort of lost that muscle, right? There's just been atrophying of the system, uh, and there are a bunch of pieces parts to it. So, the NRC don't really have rules that are perfectly tuned for innovation, but they do think about it. They're pressed by Congress to make sure that they're able to modernize. There have been a bunch of modernization efforts. NEMA, the Nuclear Energy Industry Modernization Act, in 2019 is amongst those, but they continue to go down those paths, and I think the NRC actually can easily still be an effective regulator and can allow for innovation. Because every discussion I've had with them has proven to me that there are very dedicated, very intelligent individuals there um, who want to see nuclear built and to make sure that it's safe, which is their entire job. Um, but for a very long time, there haven't been customers and great products. And the combination of those two things coming to the NRC and going, look, we want this, and look, we can build this. So let's go now get through the approvals. That hasn't happened. So the way I see it, the NRC are not really blocking things. Um,
Yeah.
and how can you expect the regulator to regulate ahead of innovation happening? They don't quite know exactly what people want and what entrepreneurs are going to deliver on. And so they need us to work together and just to talk like about the future. So they're focused on the right things.
Would you say that because there was such a gap in research and time and resources for this category of energy, that there is like a generational gap of expertise and education in these legislative or more regulatory environments?
And absolutely, there is a gap because such a long period of time has passed, of course. And I think computers have gotten very good too. So it is very easy to allow for analysis paralysis to set in, where you can model something and you can model it in amazing detail. You can run it on supercomputers, so you can get a fairly quick result. But it's easy to get lost in that world and to kind of play with every lever. Um, and it's definitely true that in many industries we've forgotten how to build. It's not just nuclear, but in other areas also, right? That loss of manufacturing really impacts every industry, and nuclear even more so, because there's a lot of rules around handling for nuclear material. If you're making a rocket company, you can go and you can find a test site or someone else's old test site you can go buy, and then you can get a rocket engine there and you can just start testing it. It's got, especially if you've already got environmental permits at the site, right? And so there's not really anything limiting you from learning by doing, which is the only way. And in nuclear, we haven't done that very much, although we do have an ability to do that, and it's through our national labs. But there, to date, is not a process developed. There's not a muscle there either on the regulatory side. But there is this really big gap, and I think there are a lot of ways to get around that. I think having the public support is really important, but that could fade if we don't deliver quickly. And I think the expectations need to be set as to what's reasonably achievable for nuclear companies. But what Radiant's job is to do is to deliver the future and to make commitments on what we can deliver. So we have committed ourselves to being ready to do a fuel test in 2026. So just a year and a half away. to solve this 50 years of no reactor. And I think others are going to do that same thing in that same year. So it won't even be just us. It'll be several different entities, and that should be happening pretty quickly. But we should all make commitments as to what we think we can achieve, and then go and get things done, and not allow schedules to slip, not allow costs to increase, because those are the things that caused a lot of the failures of nuclear projects in the past.
Right. And within Radiant, you are building it vertically integrated while also using some third party systems. You do have your software in house. I was fortunate enough to play with it and cause a failure and watch the levels drop and rise and the heat go up. So that was very, very fun. I appreciate that. How do you think about building the business and building this playbook for the future of energy and for nuclear as you continue to kind of shepherd this process and drive the US forward?
Yeah, I guess a complicated answer, but I'll try to not oversimplify. Um, so we I don't see us as actually vertically integrated. I mean, we will build something if we have to, but the best solution is someone else has made all the parts and you're just integrating, and then getting the product out to the customer, right? And focused around delivering a reliable product. That's where I start from. Um, but we have found that there are a lot of little pieces, parts that don't make sense to try to buy and integrate, just because either there's low availability, not enough enough supply options, or nothing in the market actually for the scale that we're at. And we're at a totally different scale of nuclear. So a normal grid scale reactor is 1,000 megawatts of power. That's enough power for like 1 million homes in the U.S. It's a huge amount of power. A lot of nuclear companies are working on SMRs, or what they'll call themselves, and they're about 100 megawatts. Some are up to 300, but there's kind of a range that's around hundreds of megawatts. And they're meant to be built faster, which can be really good for project finance. And then you go down to another size range. There's like 10 megawatt ish reactors. You could call those microreactors. Those often still have a couple of years worth of construction, maybe shorter, but still you got to dig a hole and have concrete and use the ground for shielding. We are smaller than any of those. We are down at 1 megawatt, so enough power for 1,000 homes. And we can mass produce these in a factory, deliver them to a site, and with no infrastructure, just outside of a 35-foot fence line, you can operate them and be at the NRC public dose limit for a reactor. So what we're working on is this completely different technology, right? It's a small unit, and when a customer operates it, they can tell it to be on and tell it to be off. All right, you have control over your system because you're the end user. And if you want to, you can turn it off and you can tell us to come pick it up, which is kind of the coolest thing ever about this 1 megawatt portable scale, is that you are not making a commitment to putting a bunch of heavy infrastructure. You are not making a commitment to having nuclear waste stored on your site that gets sent away with the unit. And I think this is the nuclear power that people want, that we haven't really seen before, that is mass producible, right? That can achieve these great economies of scale and be deployed out to anywhere in the world. And I kind of got off on a rant, so you have to remind me the other half of this question.
How are you going to build the playbook for additional companies to follow, or if that even is possible?
Um, so some of the things that we're doing are going to be generally helpful to nuclear industry.
Yeah.
So we are testing nuclear grade graphite right now. We actually will make the results of that available to everyone. So it will just qualify a U.S. domestic American-made nuclear grade graphite supplier to a higher degree, which is just going to be beneficial. Um, our fuel specification is open also. We have just published the way that we're going to alter the particle of fuel to make it more economical for a microreactor, which is really important to do, because someone will do it, and you don't want to be beaten by that in the future if you can do it now. But I don't know that there will be a playbook. Maybe we'll build part of the playbook for the 1 megawatt category, but we really, when we're thinking about nuclear or even energy in general, like it's used in such a variety of cases at such a variety of scales that we have to answer that question for a particular size range. But I should also mention the DoD's Pele program from 2019 that I announced. There's a lot of effort. There are teams working on that. at national laboratories, on the government side, and at companies, and they are making a ton of progress that is helping build the playbook that we need also. So we're not really totally out in front and all by ourselves, um, but we intend to give back and try to do that wherever we can. So there are some helpful efforts, and I think the way that we work with the regulator at both the national lab and with the NRC is going to be very beneficial, because we're going to put a lot of work and effort into educating the regulator and educating in the use of digital twin technology, the sort of advanced software simulation that you got to run that we're using.
It would be really interesting to kind of understand the scope of how much it takes to fund something like this. For you and the smaller scale,
Mm-hmm.
the micro units that are only powering 1,000 homes. What is the cost to build that versus, let's say, the really, really large nuclear facilities that we all see on the internet and are kind of like the symbol?
Yeah. So I mean, the really big ones that we have now are on the order of a few $1 billion for a reactor. A tiny little one that I'm working on is on the order of tens of millions of dollars. But everyone's design is quite a bit different, but it's way easier to finance a much smaller unit like this, of course. So I think that's really exciting, and there's no reason that the software, control systems, the digital twin, the regulatory work that we do couldn't apply to the larger scale. So I think microreactors are in this really great place where they don't need a lot of fuel, they don't need a big facility. We can fit ours inside of the old EBR2 dome at Idaho National Lab, and in this hermetically sealed enclosure, surrounded by these nuclear facilities and scientists, we can operate it in the most safe place possible to test the technology, and then have that technology apply to all the other sizes and scales of reactors. So it's awesome. I'm super excited to be working on it.
Given this is an investing show, we got to talk about the fundraising and how you fuel this kind of business. Is it mostly equity? Is it debt? Is it government grants? How much have you raised to date? And what was the composition of that?
Yeah, so we raised our first check in 2020, like a tiny check on a safe, and did that for a while, and then we raised a Series A with Union Square Ventures in 2022, and then a little over a year ago we did a Series B with Andreessen and raised a $45 million round. So when you add all that up, we've raised about 60 million in total venture capital. We have also won, I want to say it's 7 government contracts at this point, and that totals about 8.7 million, and no other forms of financing.
To dial it back to what we were talking about earlier, you've been traveling a bunch. You were just in Alaska. I would love to learn more about what you're doing there, what you're doing with communities there, and how Radiant is benefiting more remote communities.
Yeah. So when you think about what you can do with 1 megawatt of nuclear power that lasts a long time, uh, and you go look at not places that are on the grid, but places that are very far, that are remote, coastal Alaska or inland locations where maybe there's some mine for critical minerals, these kinds of locations. And often you'll find that diesel is fueling their operations, and that is very expensive, and that they basically have banks of diesel generators that are often about a 1 megawatt size. That's a very common size. And so the design of Kaleidos is such that you can just go directly replace 1 megawatt diesel generators with nuclear reactors. Um, and you could even do that on as many as you like. You could have 2 diesel and 2 nuclear generators if that makes the most sense for what you're trying to achieve. But I think a lot of the customers that we talk to are really excited about going fully nuclear and replacing all the diesel generators, because there's no emissions related to nuclear, no CO2, no exhaust fumes released, and and you can also just bring them to the site and operate them and ship them away just like you would with the diesel generator. So it can make a huge amount of sense to do that. You can also, with a reactor like this that can be quickly moved and doesn't need a lot of infrastructure, you can be operating it in about 2 days after getting it on a site, which means you could use it for disaster relief which would be very cool. Nuclear power helping save lives during the recovery after some disaster. I think is a really great vision for the future. It could also be power for refugees, right? You need to you have some population that's unfortunately relocated somewhere, and you have no power source. You'd like it to also be a clean power source if you could. Um, but I was up in Alaska and talking to all these remote communities who they have Alaska's a gigantic place, and so there are island and coastal communities. There's inland communities. There are different resources that are being extracted for value. Um, and this is not only oil and gas, but there's copper and gold and all sorts of things. Um, and people are using mixtures of power that are all over the place. Sometimes they have a lot of natural gas that's coming off of an oil well that they're using, but then you go 50 miles west of that site, and it's a village that is got a coastal transport of just 100% diesel that fills up a tank, and that tank has to last throughout the entire frozen season, which is like 6 months for them, where the sea is frozen and you can't bring new diesel in, and you've got to have enough to survive. Um, so anyway, that's some of the customers that we're talking to. Energy is not there's not really a super simple way to convey who needs it and how they need it. It's sort of the answer is like everyone needs it, and they need it different every time. But you can make a single design that literally works for everybody because you don't have to figure out how to bring in new materials constantly to these units.
So these last a really long time too. It's not like you pop it in and then it's going to be done and you can't use it in 3 months. Like these are going to
You
last a
can,
while, and you can
yeah,
replace
yeah,
it, right?
yeah. You can last several winters, and um, not only do you get electric power from the unit, but you also get heat from it. While you're generating about 1 megawatt electric, you can get about 2 megawatts of heat up to 80 degrees. So this could be like all the hot water that you need for like an entire village or some huge facility, or even maybe some production process on the oil and gas pipeline. Um, so yeah, it's if you can make use of the power and the heat, then it's even better for the environment. And there may be some version of it in the future we do to create steam, which would be at a higher temperature than 80 Celsius. But currently we do that because we optimize for electric power production.
Since this is super clean energy, I don't think we emphasize this enough. Could you just drill down into the ways in which you're educating people that this is cleaner energy?
Yeah. So the reactor is really pretty simple, right? It is, you can picture a big steel pressure vessel that holds the pressure of the helium that we push into the core. And the helium flows up a jacket and then down through a core block, which is made of graphite. And the graphite is an extremely strong material at high temperatures. And then in that graphite block, we have the trisofuel particles. Uh, and so really, we move all these control blades in the system to turn it on and to regulate power. Those are around the outside, and then you're generating power by nuclear fission, which is uranium-235 splitting into these two heavy products, and they're making heat by momentum transfer. So there's just like the two recoil products that are slowing down, and in that slowing down, they're transferring energy, making heat, and so a big block of graphite just gets hot inside of the system, and then we blow helium through that, and the helium comes out hotter, and then that is taken to go spin a turbine. Um, and because the helium is pushed in by an electric motor, we can push as much or as little helium as we'd like into the system. If that helium pump fails, the system will start to heat up, and as it heats up, it doesn't even need to heat up very much. It heats up a little bit, the reactor goes subcritical and shuts itself off. And this is true for most reactor technologies because this is the behavior of the uranium itself. Right, you will get less fission when it heats up. This is called a negative thermal coefficient of reactivity, and it makes the technology extremely simple and safe. There's a HTGR reactor in Germany, AVR, where the operators would actually just leave the operating room and allow the system to overheat, and they would leave it and leave it overnight in that state, and then come back and then start operating the next day. So it's a really pretty simple and benign thing. But the nuclear reactor just puts heat into heats a block of graphite, right? And then separately, you you pump as much helium through as you'd like to heat up and extract it out and use it to make power. And if you stop that, it turns itself off. So yeah, it's a really beautiful technology. When you've got ceramic coatings and you can handle these really high temperatures, you just get away from the meltdown risk and other risks. Of course, it comes at the price of added cost. All right, and a lot of the technology that we have, the goal is to get down to the bare bones, like lowest possible cost you could get to, right? And that's some what you see in the fleet of reactors we have today. Although I should say, they're already safe enough, which is very true. And the couple of accidents and issues that happened in the past, there's a whole bunch of reasons as to why those happened, but we don't even use that technology type anymore, and there were a lot of humans in the loop errors as well.
Lunch breaks.
Humans in the loop, yeah, all sorts of things. Just training. Every person born not knowing and needs to go through all of life and education and training and certification and to stay healthy and fit, which is not a guarantee either.
I appreciate you sharing more on that. The technical detail is super interesting and not something that many people have been exposed to or actually understand. So it's really helpful to get your deeper insights on that. Just a couple more questions. Are you guys currently hiring? How are you building out your team?
Yeah, we're always hiring, of course. Um, no, there's roles posted on our website, and I mean there's some interesting ones are like a project manager because we have actually a lot of these non-dilutive government awards now, but also lead nuclear engineers and several others, and they're constantly updated. But what we really need are people who love the mission, who are self-motivated, who are super excited about the future of nuclear that we're talking about here. And I think attracting a lot of the right personality types is one of the things a startup does really well by having this unique new worldview and message. And anyone who finds this an interesting problem, who would love to work on it, um, you're the best way of us growing as a company. Come talk to us, and we might find a fit. That is how I found SpaceX a really long time ago. I have the email I wrote to them years ago, and it was just
No
like,
way.
I love your mission. Here's what I know how to do. Let me know if you're interested. And like very simple and straightforward. And I mean, one of the great things about SpaceX, I think, was that it attracted the right sorts of people. Um, and what you study in school is kind of important. Not totally. I think it's more important to be really dedicated and motivated and excited about the mission and to work super hard for this future to be possible, because the public are more excited than ever about nuclear technology, and the entrepreneurs, the companies, the products, the reactors are a bit behind. We got to get building them.
Yeah, and you guys have an awesome office in El Segundo, and you're right around the corner from every other major player. So it's really fun to be around and be
Yeah, we got a
excited.
great new facility, and we're doing a whole bunch of the testing here. So our pressure vessel is coming pretty soon. We've got nuclear grade graphite that we're machining and putting through thermal testing, along with our helium loop, and all the software engineering that we're doing here in house, and the demo that you ran. But it's a great location. We found this empty warehouse, and we've put a bunch of funding into it to turn it into the reactor headquarters.
Well, to close out, what are you most looking forward to this year? Are there any other milestones you guys are looking to hit, or yeah, just general personal things you're excited about?
Yeah, well, we are going to fundraise again pretty soon, this summer. It'll be the last time to invest before the first reactor in 50 years gets fueled and tested. So that's, of course, exciting. But I think what's more exciting to me is that we're going to have a date where I can tell you with confidence I have actually ordered everything for the actual reactor, right?
Okay.
And when I can say that, that is also a lot of stress relieved, because there are a lot of things that are challenging to source and that delay over time and all that. But we're getting very close. And 2024 will be the last year that we're playing around with the analysis paralysis and the design and answering all the questions of the regulator and simulating things in the twin. And 2025 is going to be actually building the thing up, and it should, before the end of that year, ship out.
So exciting. It's so exciting. And I'm really astonished and amazed by all of the progress and how how much I got to see on my own. Like, thank you very much for having me over. It was an absolute pleasure. And if you haven't checked out Radiant's website yet, please check it out because I think you underratedly might have one of the best websites, and I probably should have started the podcast because like
Yeah.
it is a beautiful website, and the way that it flows and like takes it from factory to truck to location, it's amazing. So wanted to
Yeah,
give you
thank you.
that shout out. Yeah.
No, it's better to mention at the end so that everyone listens to this until this point.
Go check out the website, go apply for jobs, and then tell your friends and
Yeah,
support Radiant.
and let's build the future of nuclear technology together.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Doug.
Thanks, Molly.